our speaker. He was speaking to us in a preparation meeting, and he said, God has already filled the seats. Well, you're in them. There's a reason you're here, and that will unfold as we move ahead. We're going to do something a little bit different today than we have done in other lectures. We're going to record the lecture, and it will be put on YouTube so that your friends, as well as you, can watch this. And we have the URL all set up. It's a channel that is specific to this church. You won't get it on if you go to the ChristianScience.com. So you have to go specifically to the URL. It is on a handout that we have at the back, or if you will write your names and emails on a list we have in the back here, we will send it to you so you'll have it electronically. So that's something a little bit new, and we're just anxious to see how that all works out. But our speaker today, he's here with us from Sandia Park in New Mexico, a few miles south of here. And his name is Mark Swinney. He has been in the practice of helping others in healing for over 25 years through prayer-based healing in Christian Science. And more than that, he has also helped others to learn how to heal for themselves. Imagine that. Results matter. And the point is to understand our closeness to God well enough that we do see what's really there, and it's healing. Mark is also an author. In addition to helping people through healing, he helps them see how to do it, and he writes about it. There's an article in a very recent Christian Science Sentinel, May 11th, titled Yielding to our Divine Parent. And that periodical at Sentinel is available in our reading room. It's in the east wing of our church. You may have walked through it on your way in here. That, as well as Christian Science textbook, which you'll hear more about, other periodicals, they're all available, and through this reading room or others, that reading room will be open after the meeting today, so you're welcome to browse, and you're welcome just to be in there and look. So back to our speaker. He is a member of the Christian Science Board of Lectureship. We're pleased to have him here. Mark, it's your floor.
That's nice. I'm going to stand here while she gets her camera all set. Good. Well, if you haven't been to one of these before, feel very much at home. I was here, a few years ago, and I just love this part of the world. I tell you, it's just wonderful. Now, we're going to be talking about a pretty deep subject today. We're going to really kind of go for it, if you don't mind. You heard in that introduction, that was nice, no notes, you remembered it all too, even the title of that article. I don't know how you did it. I didn't remember it. You heard I'm a member of the Christian Science Board of Lectureship. Now, the person who founded Christian Science is a woman named Mary Baker Eddy. And she gives instructions to people on the board of lectureship. She gives instructions on things that a lecture is to cover. We're to look at public topics condemning Christian Science and then bear testimony to the life of the pastor emeritus. That's Mary Baker Eddy. Now, this idea of a public topic condemning Christian Science, what I mean by that, we're going to be looking at one particular idea, one particular aspect of really kind of what makes people don't know, a little bit uneasy when it comes to the science of Christianity. Something that, once they figure it out, they don't feel uneasy about it at all. But often, it's something that can be a tough one for them. And I really want to go after that. Now, there's a place in Mary Baker Eddy's primary work, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. She's got one chapter called Some Objections Answered, so that's perfect to where we're going with this. Listen to this little paragraph, because it'll kind of get us started. She says, in Christian Science, substance is understood to be spirit, while the opponents of Christian Science, believe substance to be matter. They think of matter as something and almost the only thing, and of the things which pertain to spirit as next to nothing, or is very far removed from daily experience. Christian Science takes exactly the opposite view. All right, so this idea of substance, that's going to be really where we're going today. And yes, here Mary Baker Eddy is talking about spirit as the only substance. She talks about that in her book. And you know, when you first hear something like that, it's understandable that it would make you a little uneasy. And you'd think, well, you know, matter really appears to be the only thing. I mean, I think for everybody. Think how early people get impressions of matter as substantial. Even before birth. Even before birth, a baby might put his hand up to his mouth. And so movement and matter, touch, that kind of thing, that is an early, weighty impression. You know, the idea of matter being the only thing, it's not just that people tell you so. It's your five senses that tell you that matter is the whole story. That kind of thing. Well, you know, you think about in a day how much you manipulate matter. You know, just turning a doorknob, eating a sandwich, or patting a dog. Things like that. Those are times where it looks like you're just working in the context of matter, living in matter, and matter is just the whole deal. Well, let's look at this idea of matter even more carefully. If you talk to a modern physicist today, a modern physicist will tell you that you never once have even touched matter. You and matter have never touched. You all appear to be sitting here in these chairs in this room. Actually, you talk to that modern physicist, he'll tell you that you're not touching that chair. You're actually sitting 10 to the -8 meters above the chair. Maybe you've had, you ever see when you have two magnets and you take the same ends of the magnet, like the two south ends, and you try to push them together? It's something like that. The electrical charge on the atomic level means that you never get to touch matter. And you know what? Even the atoms that appear to be your chair, we don't even know if they have a real position themselves. And so, you know, when you think about that, if you never have actually touched matter, then is matter a mental impression? You know, I know that feeling of matter is, it does seem to be the only thing, and it seems like it can be very threatening. Yet, I'll tell you, today in our work, we're not going to get a better model of matter. That's not where we're going today. Actually, we're going to go further. We're just going to get a better model of reality. Just what reality actually is. Now, I've got notes here. I'm going to go right through them. You know, when you think about yourself, you know, we just talked about how touch may be just a mental impression. You've never touched anything, So when you think you're touching something, it must be something mental. All right, what about you yourself? How you view yourself, that kind of thing. Could your perception of yourself also be mental? I mean, if you have never touched matter, if that's never yet happened, then you yourself, you might want to question, what that might be like. The reason I'm talking this way is because as you begin to think these things through, you really begin to question your world. Once I learned that I've never touched matter, it really made me question, because it sure seemed like I've touched matter so many times, and yet that never has happened. And it started to make me question my world. I remember the first time I ever really had that kind of experience. It's kind of fun. I remember I was a little boy where my world changed. Here's what I'm talking about. I had lost a tooth, and as I was going to sleep that evening, that night, before I fall out of sleep, I saw my dad peek in my door for a minute to see if I was asleep, and then he closed it. Well, the next morning I woke up, and I had put my tooth under my pillow, just like you all do. And I looked, and there was, a quarter there underneath the pillow. And so I remember the next morning, I'm sitting there in my parents' room on the floor, and they were getting ready for the day. And I said to my mom, as she was there in front of the mirror, and I said, last night I found a quarter under my pillow. Before I went to sleep, I saw Dad peek in the door to see if I was sleeping, and then he closed it without ever saying anything. And I said, it makes me wonder if Dad is the tooth fairy. And she looked down at me, was quiet for a second, and then said, yeah, he's the tooth fairy. And I looked at her, and I was stunned, and I said, well, wait a minute. Does that mean he's also Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny? And she said, yeah. Now this is here going to be online. I hope this doesn't disappoint a lot of little kids. But I tell you, it's funny, but I remember so well sitting there. And when she said to me, yeah, the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, those all are Dad, my dad. And I'm not kidding you, the room started to spin. Because my world, as a little kid, changed so drastically in that moment. I mean, I'd seen Santa Claus. I'd seen him with my own eyes, not just on TV. I'd seen him at the mall. I'd even sat on his lap, or at least 10 to the minus 8 meters above his lap. I'd sat right there. And so Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, those things were absolutely real in my life. No doubts. And there were all kinds of holidays that were built all around them. And now I learned all of that was completely fictitious, absolutely phony. Okay? Now I laugh to think about it now, of course, but I never forget that day, how shocked I was. Now, about a year or so after that, I had another experience that caused even more of a shock. There was a time where my parents couldn't take care of me, and so I lived with other families. And one day, my dad, he was dropping me off at some people's, at their house. And it was early in the morning, and inadvertently, he was about to drive away. Inadvertently, I got my hand caught in the door, the car door, as it shut. Now, talk about touch, and we're talking about these mental impressions. Well, I was really hurt. And I could look at my hand, and I could see the damage on my fingers, okay? Well, my father, about 3 or 4 months before this, had begun reading 2 books. He began reading his Bible, And he began reading a copy of that book I mentioned to you right at the beginning, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. It's Mary Baker Eddy's primary work, and he'd been reading this book. And you know, it's funny. I remember him then. He wasn't the kind of person who ever read books. He just wasn't that way. But he'd really been reading these books. Well, anyway, I remember, you know, he sees me crying there, and my hand is damaged, and he walks over to me, and he, you know, loves me very much. And, you know, here it is. It's another bad day. I've got to go live someplace, some other family, and, you know, he's just going to go to work. But I saw in his face that he began to pray for me. He just started doing it. Started praying for me. I had no idea really what he was praying about or how he was doing. But I'm standing there. Remember, I'm feeling the impressions of damaged matter, and I can see the damaged matter with my own two eyes. Then, in just a moment, I am healed. I'm healed right there. My hand looks just completely normal. My dad got in his car, he drove away, and the people who I was staying with, they were outside. And as I walked up the lawn of their house, I was so stunned, much more stunned than when I learned that my dad was Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. I was so stunned because, see, the laws of matter that I had learned of, at least up to that point, all of a sudden were not applying like I always thought they would. I mean, before a car shuts on my hand or something like that, that would mean that there would be a long healing process, that I would be in pain for a long time. But here, immediately, I'm well, I'm not hurting at all, and my hand has no evidence of damage. Obviously, the rules of matter are not applying like I thought they did. And it made me reassess my whole world, even though I'm only 5 or 6 years old. And I remember thinking, I was very curious about that. I wanted to know more about that. And I began going to a church like this one. I go to Sunday school sometimes, and that's where I began learning about God. Jesus talks about God in a way that is very poignant in regard to our topic here today. He says that God is a spirit. And if you're going to worship him, you're going to have to worship him in spirit. Now, when you think of God as spirit, I learned in my Sunday school class that God is absolute spirit. There's not an amalgamation of matter and spirit that makes up God. God is everywhere present simultaneously. And this spirit who is God is absolutely good and is the source of what makes you and me who we are. As I began to learn about God as spirit, that is what began to make me really suspect that I'm more than what my friends think I am. My friends all thought I was just made of matter. And now I've had this experience with my finger in the car door, where obviously something else is going on. In fact, much more is going on than meets the eye. See, the world is different than what we've been educated to believe it is. It really is different. It's actually much better than what the people in the world are telling you your reality is. It's actually much better. And it's these little experiences, like this one of being healed immediately after having my hand shut in the door. It's those kinds of experiences that open your thought up to the fact that Spirit, God, is the real and only presence. Now let's go back to that quote that I read to you out of Science and Health. You can see now why I chose it. In Christian Science, substance is understood to be spirit, while the opponents of Christian Science believe substance to be matter. They think of matter as something, and almost the only thing. And of the things which pertain to spirit, as next to nothing or as very far removed from daily experience. Christian Science takes exactly the opposite view. All right, this idea of God being spirit and you and I actually being spiritual, that's not a brand new idea. People have been talking about that before Jesus was here. Many people have made these kinds of observations. I've got some quotes here. It's interesting. St. Augustine, about 1,600 years ago, St. Augustine once said, "The soul, which is spirit, cannot dwell in dust." The Apostle Paul in the Bible, after Jesus, he said, "We look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." That should get your curiosity going. And then just in this last century, physicist Sir Arthur Eddington, he said, "The stuff of the universe is mind stuff." Now, what are these guys talking about? Why in the world wouldn't they believe that matter is the whole of existence? Why would they believe that? Well, here in Science and Health, I've got some quotes here. Listen to what Mary Baker Eddy says about substance. She says, "Substance is that which is eternal and incapable of discord and decay. Truth, life, and love are substance, as the scriptures use this word in Hebrews. The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Spirit, the synonym of mind, soul, or God, is the only real substance. The spiritual universe, including individual man, is a compound idea reflecting the divine substance of spirit." All right. You as idea, that is something that is basic to the science of Christianity, but it's actually basic to reality. Remember, we're not here to get a better view of matter, we're here to get a better view of reality. And I know that not everyone else in Billings, Montana today Missoula, I was in Billings yesterday. But it's happening in Billings too. Nobody's thinking about themselves as idea. Got to cut that part out of the YouTube thing. Great stuff. But we're not, and nobody is thinking of themselves as idea, the idea of spirit, are they? You know, here in these qualities, it can be things like just joy. I was talking to a man the other day. He's a funny guy. He lives not too far from where I do. And there's a major freeway that goes through New Mexico. And the speed limit is 75 miles an hour. Now he told me, he says, "Oh, I don't like to go faster than 65, sometimes even 60. And he says, when I'm driving along on that freeway, and I'm driving that slow, people pull up behind me, and they honk and get so mad." And he says what he does is he always keeps his back window rolled down, and he's got the funniest dog. His dog then is looking out the window on the freeway. You know how dogs do it. And he says it happens every time. The person hits the brakes, honks, gets mad, starts to pass him, sees the dog looking out the window with his tongue hanging out, having the greatest day, and pretty soon the guy, all that animosity evaporates in a second, and as he drives by, the guy waves and smiles. The joy that dog is feeling is a quality of God. It's a quality of God. It's not based in that dog's brain. It is something that is present that God is expressing in him. A dog is an idea, a creation of God, just like you and I are. And so when you have a hint like that spiritual joy that actually heals animosity that quickly. Well, when you see that, that hints at divinity. Now you think about other qualities of God that you would see in yourself or your friends. I just mentioned joy. What are some of the other ones that you happen to like that show your God-likeness? Anybody here have a favorite?
Thoughtfulness.
Thoughtfulness, you said? Yeah, I like that one too. Thoughtfulness is a quality of God because it's clearly a quality of God, because real thoughtfulness is where you are not behaving in a way to get something. You're not keeping score. You're just being unselfish for the sake of doing it. You're being thoughtful. That's a quality of God. And so somebody who spontaneously is thoughtful is showing divinity. Any others that you guys like?
Being loving.
Being loving. Yeah. And that's easier said than done. Here we're talking about conditional love, let's say. It's so easy to love and keep score. But when you love, just like when you're playing catch with a ball, you don't keep score, you just do it. You just throw the ball back and forth. And when you throw love back and forth between you and your friends, when it's unselfish like that, that shows your godlikeness. That's a divine quality. So each time you show something in your behavior, in your life, that is God-like, it hints at the presence of your identity as idea, as spiritual, as the creation of God. And what ends up happening is you realize that you actually have no other identity than the one that is spiritual. The reason why is like produces like. There's no other creator but divine spirit. It's the only creator there is. If God is spirit, completely non-physical, then naturally, you and I, we remain spiritual. Our substance is not matter. Your substance, right now, as you sit there, your substance is as the thought of God. That's what it means to be spiritual. You're God's thought. And each one of you, you don't have to die to become spiritual. You have that spiritual identity now. You're at one with God, expressing God's nature. And so each quality of God you express indicates your divinity. You remember that. I know you'll think of it each time you pass a car on the freeway or on the road where a dog's looking out the window. You'll remember, yeah, I should look for those qualities of God in myself more often. It indicates your divinity, because the more you do so, the more you understand real substance, and that is, that's key to all of us. I remember an experience I had where the substance of spirituality really became clear. This wasn't that long ago. Where I live in New Mexico, we have a few horses, and I have one particular horse, this one horse who is an Appaloosa. Now, in this part of the world, you all know what that is. This Appaloosa that we have is a leopard Appaloosa. It looks like a Dalmatian dog, that kind of an Appaloosa. Now, she is huge. She's really big. She's a really tall, big horse. And she's the dearest thing. I'm not kidding you. I just love her to pieces. She's just so good. Well, not too long ago, I was in her stall, cleaning out her stall, and I put a halter on her, and I was going to move her into another part of our land, and I was paying attention to hooking up the halter. Now, she's a horse that always is very careful of my space. She wasn't somebody who would run into me or anything like that. Definitely careful. Well, as I'm hooking up the halter and we're walking around in that little stall, inadvertently she steps on my foot. Now, a horse like that weighs about 1,700, 1,800 pounds. And it was an interesting thing. Her head was right by my head. And I hollered out very loud when she just walked right on my foot. And usually a horse when it hears a loud noise like that right by its head, you know, it's going to really shy away. She didn't even budge. She knew she walked on my foot. Now, it was interesting. I tell you, I walked out into the corral area away, and she came out with me. And it was interesting, first of all. You know, I could tell. She did, you know, if I walked on her foot or hurt her or something like that, I'd be all apologetic and telling her how sorry I am, I'm so sorry. She didn't even do that at all. Not that she didn't care about me. You know, the horses, they kick each other sometimes, and so this kind of thing happens. And I could tell that she was sort of saying, we could spend time doing the I'm sorry thing, but why go there? Anyway, all right, so I'm standing there with her. And I'm hurting so much, I don't think I can even think. The substance that makes up my foot sure felt material. And I felt like I was made of matter, and that was the whole deal. Well, I started to do what I've been taught in Christian Science. I started to pray. I prayed by listening. Now, something kind of, an idea presented itself to thought. This doesn't happen that often this way, but it was an actual line out of this book, Science and Health. And I was surprised by that. It was this. It says, when an accident happens, you think or exclaim, I am hurt. Your thought is more powerful than your words, more powerful than the accident itself to make the injury real. Well, that's exactly what I did. I said to myself, I'm hurt. And that wouldn't get me anywhere. Well, I took my phone out, and I started to look up the rest of that line in Science and Health, and I found this. Some instructions on how to pray. It says, now, reverse the process. Declare that you are not hurt, and understand the reason why. And you will find the ensuing good effects to be in exact proportion to your disbelief in physics and your fidelity to divine metaphysics, confidence in God as a all, which the scriptures declare him to be. All right, she says, reverse the process. All right, so I did it. I sort of played the whole event in reverse. I just played it in reverse all the way back to when the horse walked on me. And as I looked at every scene, as I played it in reverse, as I reversed the whole process, I realized, in thinking about the things we've been thinking together about, I realized that through every step, from the time I'd been walked on all the way out to when I was standing there with that horse, at every moment, I still had remained the idea of God. The idea of God. I've been reading about that for years in my Bible and in Science and Health, and that's one of the reasons I just love these books. Well, the fact that I'm God's idea, and I mentioned to you a few moments ago, you know, you get to the place where you realize that you're not a mixture of matter and spirit. You're not an idea with some material characteristics. No, that you're essentially wholly God's thought the whole time. And I thought, boy, God's thought never got walked on. And in that second, I'm free. All the pain's gone. There's no recovery time because I'm fine. And, you know, I should be used to this by now. But I remember looking at my horse going, man, can you believe this? Matter definitely does not work the way I've been educated to believe it is. An 1,800-pound horse walks on your foot, you're supposed to be hurting, and there's supposed to be a long recovery process. Well, now, matter didn't even hold me hostage anymore. And I just went out and did chores in the yard, just like normal. Again, I had that stunned feeling, a very happy stunned feeling, that yes, there's much more going on than meets the eye. Now, I've been talking about your identity as idea, and I want to say something that has been helpful to me, and it did relate to that feeling I just told you about. See, a lot of people, they think that they think that this is the theology, that yes, we're spiritual, sure, but there's also an identity we each have that's material. You know, that there's a material you, and then there's this spiritual idea you, that kind of thing. Well, there's only one of you. There's only one. So, what you perceive as your material body, that is actually your current perception of your spiritual self. If you have attached arms and legs to that idea of God, then you've got work to do. Me too. But there's not two of you. Don't think that there's going to be an abandonment of matter. Now, there's just you. So this is what you currently think spirituality is, whatever that may be. And so the Bible encourages us all to be absent from the body and be present with the Lord, because that's really what we are. So, that healing I just told you about in regards to that Appaloosa and my foot, was that using the power of God to correct or improve matter? Is that what happened? I've tried doing that. I've tried that awfully hard, and never once have I been successful. Never once. See, what prayer does not correct imperfect material substance. Okay? Prayer cannot do that. The reason why, again, is because all our impressions of matter are mental. You know, where did the matter come from to make you material? Where did that come from? When the Big Bang happened, what banged? What was there first to bang? You can't have matter come out of nothing. So this impression you have of yourself as a material, I think it's worth it to step back and start to really question it. All right, prayer does not correct imperfect material substance. It actually reveals the constant presence of real and perfect spiritual substance. Okay? It's a very different way of looking at yourself. I know that a lot of times people will think of prayer as asking God, who is spirit, somehow to intercede in a material world and repair matter. What God gives you instead is an entirely spiritual identity. And so prayer isn't a repairing. Effective prayer is a revealing of God and you as God's idea. When your thought moves in that direction, you're praying effectively. That is actually how it works. So you can see why that line Mary Baker Eddy gave me when praying about that horse. Now reverse the process. She's talking about disbelief in physics, confidence in God as all. All right, as I just did that, even in great pain as I did that, I walked away from God repairing imperfect material substance and began to explore a world of myself as idea. Now, when you do that, you have the power of God behind your thoughts. When the power of God is brought to bear on your thinking like that, it embraces everything you experience. And then that is why your world changes, just so quickly. All right, so you kind of get that. Healing is not a repairing, it's a revealing of yourself as God's idea. You kind of getting a handle on that. I can see it in your faces. Again, we're not looking for a higher model of matter, we're looking for a higher model of reality. Now, do you see how radical this is? Do you see why not the whole world out there is really interested in this? They want to stay asleep, believing that matter is their identities, matter is their friend, matter can harm, matter can kill. They just want to stay in this world of matter and those impressions. You can see what you're doing here in this room. This lecture that we're doing here today, it's different than other lectures I've ever done. Most of the time I think I can tell you all about how much God loves you and that kind of thing. What we're doing here in this room, we're making a serious departure. A departure from substance as physical, as atomic, and going even further. Recognizing our true spiritual identities, and I just love that idea. Now, what I have found, and you saw that when I was praying about my foot after that horse walked on it, that I can go to God for help in understanding my spiritual substance. That is a wonderful thing. Because if we just had to do it intellectually, I couldn't get anywhere. Just to clench our fists, stare at matter, and say, you're not real. I get nowhere with that. I just love going to God for help, like I did there in the corral, standing next to my horse. You know, when I was healed and I started doing the work, the horse looked at me like, yeah. I want to do better. I want to be just half as good as my horse at not being shocked by this stuff. But go to God for help. And you know what? God's help, it comes in so many different ways. You know, here, this is going to be on YouTube, and I've got other lectures about specifically how God answers your prayers and helps you. There's one called The Healing Effect of Your Prayers. So if you go online and you do a search on YouTube for The Healing Effect of Your Prayers, you'll get all kinds of ideas on just how God answers your prayers and helps you. Mary Baker Eddy, she defines that help as the Christ truth. It's the information God gives you, help you to understand that you're spiritual, that your idea. And I go to God that way every day. And so, as you do it, you know, as you've been hearing me talk here today, I know that you've been thinking about yourself and the substance that everybody thinks you are as matter, and the substance that God knows you are as idea. As you've been doing this, you might feel a little more free. You might feel even inspired. You know, as you explore your spirituality, let God help you do this. Now, I've only got an hour to talk to you today, but if you take your Bible, and I know on the way out you might get copies of your book, Science and Health, the book I've been telling you about, you'll get those little hints of your spirituality. It's going to be better than just God repairing imperfect matter. Instead, you're going to recognize that you're existing here in this moment as God's thought, spiritually, as idea. As you do that, even if you get a glimpse just for a moment, stay there. I always say, when you get to a good place in thought, stay in that place. Stay in that place. Watch for when you're doing this right. This is so important. I tell you, all around the world I've met people who are religious, they'll say, but the more they read the Bible, the guiltier they feel. They read the Ten Commandments. They read the Sermon on the Mount with all of the Beatitudes, and they just feel so bad because they look at all the things that are written there, and all they think about is what they're doing wrong. Now, I can promise you, God didn't give us that Bible, and Jesus didn't give us the Sermon on the Mount to make us feel guilty. Those things in the Beatitudes, they're there to help us identify when we're doing things right. So when you're expressing these qualities of God, indicating your spirituality, you're supposed to rejoice. You know, that joy, the thoughtfulness, the love, those different divine qualities, when we are expressing them, throw confetti in the air. If you can do it for 5 or 10 seconds in a day, rejoice in that. Really. Maybe tomorrow you'll do it for 15 seconds. It's really important to go at life this way. Start to recognize your spirituality, and if you feel it just for a moment or two, be so glad. That's a much better way to go at life. Try it for a month. You know it doesn't work, just feeling guilty. Instead, enjoy your spirituality. And after 6 months of watching, when you have just a glimpse of yourself as an idea, after 6 months of doing that way and rejoicing in it, you won't be the same person. Try it. It really does work. When you are maybe starting out in your morning, open up your Bible. Open up your copy of Science and Health. Now you're going to get one. And look for something that really charges you, gives you a good glimpse of your spirituality, and then carry it with you in your heart throughout the day. Do that. I used to be a baseball player. And when I was a baseball player, I worked very hard on carrying the right model for playing baseball. I worked hard to carry that during a game. I would do that. Like if I was a position player. So let's say I was preparing for a game and I might have batting practice before the game, and I would think very carefully about the model of good hitting. I would think about that. And then when the game started, I would be there in the stadium, and there'd be all the people in the crowd, and I'd be waiting on the on-deck circle. And I would think about the correct model for hitting, some mechanical ideas or something like that. And I would really get stay that peaceful with that clear, calm model in thought. That's what makes a good player. Now, it works the same way when you're praying. Yes, you open your heart up to God, and God shows you something new about your spirituality. And that model is clear in your thought. Well, okay, good, you got it to the first pitch. But keep going through your day, carrying the feeling, the spiritual sense of that model. Mary Baker Eddy, she talks about this in Science and Health. She says, the sculptor turns from the marble to his model in order to perfect his conception. We're all sculptors, working in various forms, molding and chiseling thought. What is the model before mortal mind? Is it imperfection, joy, sorrow, sin, suffering? Have you accepted the mortal model? Are you reproducing it? To remedy this, we must first turn our gaze in the right direction and then walk that way. We must form perfect models in thought and look at them continually, or we'll never carve them out in grand and noble lives. Here come those qualities now, that unselfishness, goodness, mercy, justice, health, holiness, love, the kingdom of heaven reign within us. And sin, disease, and death will diminish until they finally disappear. All right, well, that model is something God has to give you each day. You can't create that on your own. Go to God and let God tell you in your heart about yourself. It's important to do that. See, in order to understand yourself as an idea, it's important to stop battling matter. Influenced by one another. We're so influenced by one another. And because the rest of the world is not interested in Jesus' message of spirituality, doesn't mean it's not the most important message. And so, for each one of us here, as we are making these incredible strides we're doing here in this room, making this incredible switch from substance as physical to substance as God's thought, it is very good for this world. And so let's continue to lead the way this way. Now, as you read through Science and Health, you'll notice that the author Mary Baker Eddy definitely sees much more about spiritual substance than I have, but I keep studying her book. I was reading the other day, I saw something interesting that Clara Barton, the woman who founded the American Red Cross, what she said about Mary Baker Eddy. She said, "While I have not studied deeply enough the great religion founded by Mrs. Eddy to consider myself a Christian Scientist, I can say that I look upon Christian Science as I understand it as the most ideally beautiful, yet most practical and comforting of beliefs. It is doing more in the world today and will continue to as more people become cognizant of the beauty of its teachings than any other one influence for good. Mrs. Eddy should have the respect, admiration, and love of the whole nation, for she is its greatest woman." My goodness, that's quite a statement. All right, well, you all have been hovering above your seats very well this whole hour. Isn't that interesting? You know, to learn that you've never touched matter. Isn't that an interesting thing? You've never touched it. It's been. And he had gotten, he was a chemist, he'd gotten his undergraduate degree at MIT, his bachelor's at, or his master's at Caltech, and his doctorate at the University of Illinois. And he studied these books I've been telling you about, the Bible and Science and Health. And one time he was doing an experiment with potassium cyanide, and that's a material, a substance that you have to, he was melting it. And it takes a very high temperature to melt this, and so he was melting the cyanide in a metal dish. He stirred it with a glass rod, and then he put the rod into the dish or balanced it on the dish, and then looked at his notes to see what he was supposed to do next for his experiment. He picked up the rod with the wrong end. And that molten potassium cyanide, he said he looked and he saw that it burned into his hand, and the crystals of cyanide were there. He saw the white crystals in his hand, and he knew, being a chemist of that caliber, that most of the time he wouldn't have very long to live. Well, he too, this scientist, he too, as a chemist, had been learning of the substance of spirit as his only substance. He'd been learning of that for many years. One particular idea in this book, Science and Health, that helped him, he said, it's where Mary Baker Eddy says, we must look deep into realism instead of accepting only the outward sense of things. We must look deep into realism. And you know what? He did that right then. And he saw that, I can't tell you exactly what he saw, but I've read what he wrote about it. And he recognized his substance as spiritual and therefore invulnerable. Invulnerable to even potassium cyanide. He said within 3 days there was no evidence of a burn anymore, and by the end of the week, there wasn't even a red spot on his hand. Now again, there's an example of matter not behaving as it's supposed to. And you've heard several experiences today of that kind of thing. Now I know everybody here in this room, each one of you have, maybe as you've heard me talk, wondered in your own life about experiences where matter didn't behave. There was more going on than what met the eye. Go out from here and let's continue to experiment. Remember, you're going to do this with God's help. It's the Christ truth that helps give you these ideas of your identity as spiritual. Now, as I've been talking about this today, you guys have any thoughts or questions that you might maybe have thought of as I've been discussing? Have you had anything that you would want to talk about in here? Yes?
When I work in a restaurant environment, we often get burns.
Yes.
And I ignore them, but it seems like it's there.
Yes.
So how do you write about that?
You know what? You hear her question. And so you're around the grease all the time, and here this grease burns your arm, and you say, how do I do this? And you know what? Remember I said how you can't really do this intellectually, where you just go, well, I'll just ignore it, or maybe, I don't know, I'll just clench my teeth real hard and say, there is no matter, or something like that. And it just gets you nowhere, you know, you feel, oh, that's not it. No, it's to go to God to understand who you are. Now, sometimes that happens where you get an idea of yourself as spiritual, and it's just sort of an attitude that you have. You just get this attitude. I had an experience similar to what you're talking about once, and I'll tell you real quick. It was Christmas time, and we were having fondue, where it was boiling oil in a little pot. And it was plugged in to it was a cord, there was a cord to the fondue pot. And I had said to the family, okay, watch the cord, we got this boiling oil. And somebody inadvertently tripped over the cord, and the fondue pot started to slide off the table. Just real quick, without thinking, I put my hand right in it and pulled it up onto the table. Now, for the previous 2 weeks, I had really been thinking about what we're discussing here today. I had really been thinking about how I am the idea of God, but it wasn't an intellectual thing. I was really going kind of hand in hand with God. I would read my Bible, and I would read in Science and Health along with my best friend, and I would just feel God pointing out ideas, helping me to understand that I'm spiritual. Now, what happened, it wasn't like I had some great epiphany, oh yeah, no, I'm spiritual. It just had an effect of changing the way I view myself, and it was like an attitude thing. I just kind of saw myself more as having the substance of God as my identity, rather than the substance of matter. So when I put my hand in that oil, I didn't feel like I was vulnerable, but I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it without thinking, you know. So I remember I put my hand on our napkin that we had there to get the oil off. And I was in no pain, and there was no burn. And my daughter, she saw me, wiping my hand off, and she started to cry, thinking I was really hurt. And I said, I'm fine. And I was completely fine. So there wasn't a recovery period because I wasn't burned by the oil. You know what I mean? Now, here's what I've learned from it. That when you go to God for help in understanding who you are, embrace it. Again, watch for when you're feeling and doing it right. And let it just be kind of your attitude. So at the restaurant, it's not going to be about you as a physical being protected from oil. It's going to be you at the restaurant as the thought of God. And that's a completely different thing because, again, prayer does not repair imperfect matter. Prayer reveals spiritual substance, the perfection of you as God's idea. Now I can see you looking up. Does that help a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, good. It's an interesting thing to experiment with. And I think this makes the point very well for the rest of the group. That we're not just doing this to manipulate the illusion called matter. I never even touched the oil. I was 10.8 millimeters away from it. 10.8 to whatever it is. All right, well, we went over. We went too much time, so the people, we're going to have to edit our YouTube thing a little bit. But, sometimes at the end of a lecture, I do some big old cymbal crashing in. I'm not doing it with this one. Because the things we're thinking through today, they're the big deal in this world. What we did today, thinking this through, is what really matters. So do this. I think we got a good taste of what real substance is. We got a taste of it, but let's go further. Let's go from this room, let's go out from here, and even tonight, turn to God and let God tell us more individually, each one of us, about our identities as spiritual creations. Will we go further with this now, do you think? Does that feel like something you want to do? There's much more to you than meets the eye. There's much more to you. You weren't created to be matter. You weren't created to hover over a matter. You were created to soar beyond matter. And you're doing it right now. If that's what you are, then you want to know all about it. Do not let the world hold you back. Not going to happen for me either. All right, we're done. We've got our